Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. It's the Lavelda Show, Women of Power, and you are watching part of the Color of Your Voice series, part 2. The first episode, we dived into so many angles around stereotypes and where they sit and how they work and what makes them bad and what makes them good. You know, there are some things about stereotypes that are really good. So this series is really focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. After the recent events of last year, 2020, with the pandemic, with the death of George Floyd, we saw the world start to look at diversity, inclusion, and equity in a way very different. Governments have changed, organizations have changed, but what can we as individuals do? To help me discuss this, as same guests as last time, two incredibly powerful women, I have Dilys Silla and Sean Young.
Hello.
Ladies, welcome back.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here again.
Thank you.
Mamma mia, did we get into it last time?
Yeah.
We certainly uncovered, unlocked, reconfigured, and reevaluated. Today I want to touch on a slightly different topic, still in the same arena, but it's something we've seen coming to the surface a lot more. You know, as soon as a topic comes to the surface, we start to learn new language. We didn't have before that wasn't really in our lexicon, right? It's like you get to a new country, you walk away now knowing different foods you didn't know exist before. And one of the words we're hearing a lot in the space of diversity, inclusion, and equity is this term microaggressions. So not the big in your face, rah, rah, shouting at you, but microaggressions. The problem sometimes with terms we hear a lot is we hear them, sometimes we use them, but we have no idea what they really mean. So before we even dive into microaggressions, what are they? Like what constitutes a microaggression? And why has it become something that we're looking at so often now? I'll start with you, Sean.
Well, I can only talk from my perspective as a woman. And so microaggressions in my life that I've experienced is catcalling, you know, that kind of stuff, or hints that, you know, maybe, you know, if I'd done something, you know, I'd get something, especially in business as a businesswoman. How many times I've had people suggest, you know, so in my lived experience, that would be a microaggression for me. In a lived experience that I've seen my husband go through and my sons, it's he has because of the color of his skin. So for instance, he'll be in a place and he'll be asked, are you really supposed to be here? You know? And that's a microaggression towards him because why not? You know, and he gets that constantly. So, but I can't speak from that angle because I live in a white skin and it's privileged. So I think we should ask.
Dilys, what are microaggressions? Because it's a term we see, it's bounded about a lot now in this space, you know, microaggression, and we need to get past them, but what are they?
I think we should focus on the word aggression. When something or somebody is aggressive, they are in a way exhibiting a level of power mixed with anger normally, or disapproval. When you talk of microaggressions, they're just done in a way that if you don't have a magnifying glass, or if you're not aware of it, you'll miss it. And when people are subjected to microaggressions, the onus then is on them to say, but can't you see what they're doing? But can't you see what's happening? And they're like, no, because it's micro, it's tiny, it's small in how aggression is supposed to look like in its natural general context, but it's not small to the person who's on the receiving end of it. So for me, it was very much in terms of race, it was very much around this dismissiveness, you know, dismissive behavior towards my needs and switching it around and being gaslit. That, you know, are you sure it wasn't you that maybe you sounded a little bit too whatever, or you're a bit too this, or you're a bit too that? But it's said with full knowledge that I wasn't a bit too anything. I remember, you know, being on a contract, and I was working with this man who was only called in because I was facing microaggressions from this woman who had been in this job since 1684, since the year of Cronenberg. And she was just upset at the fact that I'd come in and I was just doing my job, because I wasn't doing anything more than just doing my job. And, she would hide work from me, and she would give me misinformation, and they were aware this was happening. So they sent this person to oversee this, this whole working process. But then he did exactly the same thing, and then would call me into the office whilst we're having a meeting, and then be quite aggressive, but in a way that, if to the untrained eye, he was just being overcautious. He was just being helpful to make sure that I knew what I was doing, and it was very patronizing. And that kind of behavior where you're being pulled up on stuff, but he's not doing it to my colleague who's not working properly, but he's doing it to me. But I guess in this story, what turned around for me was I knew I would very possibly lose my job. But I remember calling him into the office and saying, I will not give you permission to disrespect me. And it was probably one of my finest moments. And I was not leaving until I got an apology, though I didn't ask for one. But he had to apologize at the end of it. And those microaggressions and just this overbearing behavior and being treated like a child almost, it stops.
So it sounds to me that it can, if I was going to liken it to something else, it can almost land in some ways, in some respects, not always, as a micromanaging. It has that kind of same feel in some respects.
It was dressed up as that.
Okay.
It was dressed up as that, but I had to educate this man and say, you aren't qualified to tell me how to do my job. You were only brought here to ensure that little psycho didn't affect this little psycho.
Yeah.
That's all. But if you're talking of experience, I have 15 years of experience doing this job. What exactly are you micromanaging? You're not qualified. So it was shrouded in that. And I think the workplace for us is probably one of the most dangerous places, because we have to eat and we have to pay our bills. And so therefore, having a voice will cost you your home, will cost you the ability to provide. So for us, it's difficult, where you have to make that choice. I made that choice, but not forgetting I'd had so many other experiences prior to. I'd gone through the breakdown, the PTSD, the sleeping, not being able to sleep, the panic attacks, the anxiety. I'd never suffered from these things before. And I was introduced into this whole new world of being emotionally challenged and mentally challenged because of the workplace, because I'm spending 40 hours of my week in that place. I can't escape it. They are my family more than my family. I only see my family at the weekends and in the evenings.
So I guess that's what makes microaggressions difficult. It's then a question is the perpetrator, for want of a better term, consciously aware that they're targeting somebody particularly, or is there something else going on? Because it's, like you said, it's the individual who feels it, but actually, because it's not a punch, it's not a kick, it's not slamming against the wall, it's not outright abusive language. It's kind of subtly sort of hinted at, that it can easily be disguised as maybe you're a little bit too sensitive.
Oh yes.
So how do we know?
How many times of women do we hear that?
Yeah.
You're just a bit sensitive.
And I'm hearing the word grooming in my mind.
Yeah.
I think that this can be classed as racial grooming. I know that term doesn't exist the same way I use racial gaslighting, but it's almost the same. Trying to lead you into a place of submission and telling yourself, or you trying to be convinced that this is normal. I'm not being treated any differently, but you are. And you're being groomed into a place of submission and of subjugation.
The New York Times article that I read said it's considered death by 1,000 cuts.
Oh yeah.
100%.
100%.
And I question, it can't be the person's not unaware if they're physically hiding work, if they're physically doing things to undermine a person in their workplace, that must come from a place of being, you know, there's something wrong with your life. You know, you're not happy. Because if you need to do that to someone else, then you're not happy, right? And don't be taken out on someone else because the constructs of society have said that black people are lesser than human, which is a hangover from the slave trade. And I don't even want to hear people saying, oh, we're going back to the slave trade.
We don't say that about the Holocaust, do we?
Well, exactly. And like I said, like my husband's great-grandfather was an overseer. It's not that long ago. And if there's been microaggressions constantly, and not just microaggressions, we all know that, then how is anybody going to step out of that? So it's not, I can't even sit back and say it's somebody, you know, what were they in the days when they hid all the paperwork? No. Exactly. They've deliberately done it. And it's come from a human being who is obviously very sad, who is very, has issues that they need to deal with, that they're trying to push on someone else, whether it be issues of they're scared for their job because they don't have the qualifications. Hey, go to Open Uni, man. You know, learn more. Open up your mind.
Learn from the person that you're trying to sabotage.
Stop being nasty to the person, and you'll get.
You might learn something.
Yeah, you might.
Dylan is grateful. She'll share.
I always do. That's the thing that's so annoying.
Well, this whole series came about because of Dillis's daughter, so scared to go to school after we keep talking about George Floyd, but this was the England, who was it, Romanian? I don't watch football.
No, it was England game.
England game.
Italy. I know it was Italy, England.
Italy,
I never watched
England.
the football, but I'm married to an Italian, and trust me, I know who was playing. And I know who won.
So that
it wasn't England
that game made a little girl in the UK say to her mum, Dillis, I don't want to go to school because I'll be called a monkey. Now, you may consider calling a child a microaggression because it's so normal that this child knew that if they went to school, they'd be called a monkey. And it wasn't the only child who felt like that at this time, because I saw Dillis's live and I listened, which is what I implore white people to do, is to start listening and stop asking people of colour to fix the issue, because the person who's hiding all your paperwork and being aggressive has issues. You're sad, you know, so get some joy in your life, and you might get some joy if you start, you know, opening your heart to people and stop being so nasty.
There's a few different ways they could get some joy, but let's not that's a different type of show, ladies. That's a different type of show.
Yeah.
So given the nature of microaggressions, in so much as they're small enough to not feel the need to say something. Do you know what I mean?
That's just off-center.
So I kind of want to look at a couple of things. It's firstly, how do we recognize it? So I think if you can see it over a long period of time, you would hope that somebody in your office, Dillis, would have noticed. Well, clearly they did. They brought somebody else in to deal with the problem, right? So they noticed that there's a consistent behavior here.
Sure.
How do we recognize those one-off instances? You know, if we're sat next to somebody where this is happening, how do we know that's a microaggression?
How do we, the person on the receiving end,
the
person observing?
Somebody observing.
So the person observing, I think it's beyond that, because if you're observing, it means you've seen it.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be convinced.
But
if I'm coming to say to you, this is what's happening, then you can observe.
Yeah.
But once you have observed, and you know that I'm of sound mind, I'm corpus mentis, I am in full, control of my faculties, don't then make me have to prove to you, we are not in a court of law, don't make me have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that I am being treated in this way. And this is where it is difficult when things are done overtly. Because, the burden of proof is on the victim to have to convince the third party that they are going through what they're going through. If we are able, you see, racism is the only trauma, and believe you me, it is a trauma. It's the only trauma that a group of people face that they have no sympathy or little sympathy. It is the only trauma that you're likely to face that you will be victim blamed. Hence, you're pulling the race card. Are you sure it's not all in your mind? Are you sure it's not this? If I'm sexually assaulted and I come to you and I say that this man touched my bottom, you're not going to say to me, unless you're one of the, you know, police in Edmonton, yeah, will turn around and say, you sure that he didn't just
graze you?
Yeah,
he wasn't
graze
just
you.
getting past, and
Yeah,
there was a
or it wasn't like a
narrow
real
space.
strong gust, you know, gust of wind that just kind of blew across your buttocks. Because I have had that. And you just reminded me, actually, as I said that, I just remembered that, you know, obviously you know that I ran the charity Who Will Hear My Cry, raising awareness on rape, child abuse, domestic violence. And I had a victim of domestic violence that I went to report the case to the police. They were not interested. Her husband threw her out of the car, a moving car. They were not interested. It took me a year to get 3 women who were sexually assaulted, all women of colour, to make a disclosure to the police. And when this woman described this man who, you know, having, you know, being sexually aroused, you know, brushing himself behind her, you know what she was asked? Are you sure it wasn't his phone? So, you know, this is what, I didn't even realize that this was locked in my subconscious to even use that as an example.
We've had a
And that's
conversation
disgusting.
as well that shows that as a white woman, it would be a different story. Now, I'm a survivor of multiple rapes, and I've been to the police, and the minute I said I was raped, it was, you know, kits were coming out, everybody...
We had none of that.
The police woman was right there, like, are you? Counselling was lined up, you know. It was like the unfolding, and because we've been having chats, like some of the experiences, and I know as a white person who has that humanity that we talked about in the last episode, in their heart, it's hard to believe that two women are going to be treated
Completely
so
differently.
differently by people who are key workers.
That's right.
Who are there to care. We as well have spoken about our birth stories and the way that Dilys was treated compared to the way I'm treated, and I see it as I walk in my life, and so
I think the evidence
I
is there
hear
when it
you.
comes to having
Yeah.
children. Black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts. And I know that from personal experience, because I nearly died having my son, who's 29 now. And I remember at the time I was asked, do you want your waters broken? And I said no. And they sent my then partner to go and get my case. What do you think they did? They took out this long stick, and I was violated, and I had my waters broken. I, you know, had a terrible birth. I remember I had to be, you know, stitched up from here to the back of my ear, and I was in so much pain. It was my first child, and I was seen by this matron, horrible woman, went round, you're fine, but I was in excruciating pain. And I called one of the student nurses, because they were nice, and I said, could you just check if I'm okay, because I'm in so much pain. She said, oh my God, you have such a bad swelling. Let me get you an ice pack, let me get you medication. That other lady said I was fine. I needed milk for my son because I'd lost, you know, quite a lot of blood. I was not in a good way. I was told that no, they would not get the milk for me. I must walk and get it myself. Now the distance from where the ward was to where to get the milk was a good, I would say 50 yards. It was a long walk. I didn't make it to more than 10 yards. I collapsed in the foyer, and I was just a crumpled heap crying on the floor. And one lady's husband, you know, for some reason there was no one there. And this woman's husband came and he helped me, and they, you know, I was put in a wheelchair, and that same woman went round and she said, if she falls again, make her walk.
And when you're talking about them little microaggressions, are they coming from a place where there's this diseducation in the racist constructs we have in this world that have come from slavery, that black human beings are lesser than? So it's okay for you to take your microaggressions because you're not quite cutting it in your own life, and you're feeling like your job's at risk because you know you kind of lean back too much and you're so scared to step out yourself, especially women, because we all know what it's like to live as a woman. Can you imagine? I can't imagine, you two guys can, of what it's like to live as a black woman, right? And that was part of why we had to have this conversation, because there's a lot of conversations going on between white and black guys, opening up that conversation as black men and what they go
That's
through.
true.
I have not seen any conversations opened up
That's true.
between white and black women to open up to the heart and the soul of white women to realize that you're hearing it now in our voices, in what we are saying, that there is a different way that black women get treated, and that it is wrong, and you know in your heart it's wrong. And if you're not in the place, if you're in a place where you're doing these microaggressions, because every step of that birth story was filled with little microaggressions of ignoring her in the bed, ignoring her cries. They're microaggressions that led to her collapsing and has led to probably many black women dying.
There's a 14-year age gap between my children. But I'll tell you a more recent story. So one of my best friends just had a baby. 14-year age gap.
I thought you said 40. It's like, wow.
I know black don't cry, girl, but you know, there is a limit.
There comes a point.
There comes a point where
a crease or two shows up, maybe not a black. I'm conscious of time, ladies, and I know we could dive into this in so many different ways. And I think what's really helped is being able to see, because I think it can be very easy to be in our bubble and not see the distinction. And in some ways, the sadness and the beauty of both of your stories is that there's so many overlap that it becomes unquestionable to say, well, hold on a minute, we've both experienced similar scenarios, and yet they've been completely different. Now, we're not saying every black woman who goes into the police is going to be dismissed, and we're not saying every black woman who has a baby is going to have trauma, right? Nor are we saying every white woman who goes into the police station is going to be taken seriously, right?
Because we know that's not true.
We know that's not true, right? So just to be clear, it's not that clear cut, people. No. It's not that clear cut. But what's come out of this is that where those differences lie comes down to small decisions by a small group of people that lead to a particular outcome, and it happens disproportionately, right?
Yes.
So what do we do? What can we do? And gratefully for you, Dilys, somebody's husband thought to pick you up off the floor. What can we do when we're around this sort of thing? Because presumably, if you have an ounce of humanity, you see that situation,
you would say something.
And it doesn't matter. Old, white, black, brown, purple,
Correct.
Pink, you kind of go, somebody's in pain.
Correct.
Here, right?
Yeah.
If you're in that police station and somebody is bawling, it doesn't matter.
You're absolutely right.
Age, race, gender, homeless, wealthy, poor, you don't care. So what do we do when we're around that kind of situation and we're watching the escalation of it, or we're seeing something that doesn't sit right?
Sorry, Sean. I wanted to finish the story because I think it was very important.
Okay.
So my friend just had a baby, and she was saying she was in pain. She was told she can't be because she doesn't look like she's in pain.
And is she black?
This is the reason why we are 4 times more likely to die.
That's four stories right there in a few minutes.
She was told, you don't look like. What does a black person in pain look like? Why are my words not sufficient enough for you to know? Now, if women are 4 times more likely, black women, to die from childbirth in this country, then it's not a small group of people. You have a whole medical profession that is failing black women. Why are we not being listened to? If I say I'm in pain, how do I prove I'm in pain? By screaming and wailing, and why do I have to go to those ends?
You'd be far too aggressive and dramatic then.
But exactly.
I think that brings us to a really great point, for us to kind of come to a wrap with this, which is really, it's the microaggression is when, and sometimes we may be the person who's done it, like we're unconscious of it. But I think there's something we can ask ourselves, which is, why do I need, is it reasonable for me to need this person to prove this? In some circumstances, it may be, right? If you're telling me your arm's cut off and I can see your arms there, then prove it to me, because I can't see that there's a slice in your arm. But why would I need them to prove this in any more way? And I think it's kind of similar to any situation in which you think, why are my words, or why do I need more validation
That's right.
behind the words of the individual. And I think women may be able to relate to this more because we, regardless of gender, regardless of race, have, it must be your hormones.
Yep.
No, I'm just angry.
She needs a good shag. And I'm saying that because we are very disparaging, to women. If there's a woman in the office that seems like she's a bit uptight because she needs a good shag or because she's single or she ain't got no kids, because there is a box that every girl child is born into there is a label for you to fit into that box. And I think as women, what we have to do is the fact that mine may be a race box, you know what it's like to live as a woman.
Yeah.
That much we are, on common ground.
Yeah.
And that's where your humanity has to kick in. Because think about all the things that you have to suffer as a woman. You add the race on top of it. That which you cannot hide. That which me as a black woman, I don't want to hide. But I said this before, we have to start to appeal to the humanity. If you feel you are a good person, then compassion has got to be the bedrock of your character. You have to have a heart. When I was coming, a man fell on the escalators, but he was going up, I was coming down, and I was thinking, I wish I could do something.
What can I do? Yeah, we're in the middle. Y'all, if you're watching from abroad, London escalators in the they're long. They go on for a long while. So if you meet in the middle, you can't jump over them. By the time you get to the top, he is all the way at the bottom.
And I was upset because I'm thinking he's hurt. I'm not thinking, oh well, he looks like he's all right. It's not that bad. You don't do that.
I want to say with the microaggressions is to be aware, right, that you could be at the beginning of a chain reaction, okay? You could see the shifting of papers. What if the shifting of papers was in that hospital? People were like, with the papers, and then somebody doesn't get the care that they need.
Absolutely.
What if the watching someone mess with someone at work with just little bits, then they lose their job, they become homeless. These microaggressions, they're called micro, but they are the beginning of a chain reaction that could cause so much pain in the life. And don't think that pain can't tick round in you. I mean, I was homeless for 7 years, and everybody asked me how in the UK was a white chick homeless for 7 years. Exactly. You don't know what the tip's going to be and where it's going to end. And also I want to as well understand, sometimes I might not recognize what a microaggression is. So I'd like people in the workplace to, again, we said as the last episode, listen. If somebody who's your colleague is coming to you and saying like if it was a woman about, like we've talked about sexual assault, you would be like dead serious about that. When a black woman or a black man or anybody of any nationality who's experiencing racism comes to you in a workplace and says, this is happening, this is how that makes me feel. And even things like, it was on the news the other day, a doctor who was a woman of colour was not given her proper title. You've got to listen.
Did you just see that when you said it? I went,
yeah,
that's bad. And I'm like, just normal, like
standard.
It's standard.
Listen and know that you're at the beginning of the chain.
I think that's a really important point.
It's a crucial point because
for us to end on as well.
When I recounting this story of papers being shifted, my husband was in hospital, having nearly died. Well, I've lost my husband now, my late husband. That's why I wrote the book, Not This Widow. So you're right about that, Chen, because whilst this nonsense was going on, I was having to make trips to the hospital. The pressure I was under was unbelievable. So you're playing with people's lives.
And I think it's just understanding. I'm going to end on this story because as you shared the ripples, I remember being at work and I had a colleague who was just a bit odd. And he was just a little bit creepy. Ladies, you'll recognize this. Sometimes it's just somebody just make you feel a bit weird. They haven't done anything. He was never outright but I used to avoid him. I was like, something about him. I don't want to be in a car with him by myself. Meetings with groups of people. Don't send me on a mission with this one by myself. We're both arriving separately and leaving separately. That's what it was. And it reminds me of this because what happened was, as I'm speaking to my other colleagues, I'm like, listen, is he just me or do you lot feel a bit odd around him as well? This is when we know he hasn't done anything. He hadn't done anything. There was no outright anything. He ended up not sticking around for much longer because he had a bit much to drink, and then he did do something, and that was the end of his job, right? But the point being that it was lots of little things.
That's right.
Which only the women in the office recognized as a something.
Right.
And nobody brought it up because there wasn't anything tangible enough to bring it up.
Yeah.
But there were enough little, this doesn't quite sit right, that at least amongst a female community, we'd recognized
Absolutely.
we kind of want to stay away from this one.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it wasn't until it escalated that something was done about it. Now, thankfully, at that point, the company went around and spoke to some of the other ladies, and we were like, always, never did anything, always felt odd. You know, there was always an undertone.
Yeah.
An undertone to something that's being said. And that's the point when we're talking about microaggressions. It's not the last straw is when you see the person on the floor, when you see somebody lose it. But it's lots of little things that were recognized for a while as a discomfort. And I think it's about being more open to them. It's about listening to when they come through, because people will say it feels a little bit off. And being vigilant around those, because it's a domino effect. And the last domino is the biggest, and that's normally where we see the end aggression.
Yeah.
But we can catch this early. And I think it's understanding there are other ways in which it shows up. And I just wanted people to relate to maybe something else where they can say, oh yeah, I can see how that happens.
Yeah.
But it happens in a racial context as well. And having an openness to hear somebody say, this person feels like they're treating me a little bit differently. And then just be aware, watch, observe, collect the evidence for yourself, and be a support for others. So
Wonderful.
My goodness, we could dive into this more.
I'm being quiet now because I'm like,
I love how you ended this. It was just really, even for me listening, it's really great food for thought.
Something to think about. So you've been listening to and watching the Women of Power show, Lavelda show. This is the series, The Color of Your Voice. If something in this program has touched your heart, has resonated with you, please comment, share. Let us know what sat with you. This is a message we want to get out to the world. It's not about pointing the fingers. It's about making a more diversely inclusive, equitable world that all of us can live in and show up and shine as the beautiful selves that we are. Until next time, folks, have a wonderful evening, day, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's a ciao from us for now.